Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
Welcome back to Artificially Ever After, where today we're going to be discussing
Deepfake Real Problem.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to be discussing quite a big topic, the world of deepfakes, which, I'm sure most of you will have come across that term and will have heard before, but we're going to be unpacking it today, talking about kind of all sides of the conversation. I know I was slightly reluctant to record this episode just because it's quite a big kind of loaded topic, and we're tackling it head on though, I think, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a bit of attention in media recently with the Hollywood situation, right?
There's lots of different recent topics that we're going to cover. I know that the kind of initial boom of news around deepfakes started a couple of years ago now. I actually spoke to someone recently who was saying that they kind of felt that in terms of the media coverage, it's kind of died down around deepfakes, but hopefully today we'll show that, deepfakes are actually on the rise. That is definitely not true, that things are kind of on a decline. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we're going to start off the episode talking about, what are deepfakes. We'll then kind of discuss the technology behind them, how do you actually make them, and give a bit of historical context, but we're going to bring back the good, the bad, the ugly segment, which we used for ChatGPT, and then we'll have a quick break. We'll keep the fun fact segment.
I'm going to be trying to be a bit more fun with my fact this time. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and then after the break, we're going to talk about how you can detect deepfakes, the legal, social implications, and a bit of a glimpse of the future.
Yeah, looking ahead. So let's get into it. So Riku, should we just start by unpacking the term? What is a deepfake?
Let's go for it. So the deepfake is directly from the algorithms that make the deepfakes. So those are deep learning algorithms that we kind of touched on in the previous episode.
Yeah, in our first episode we kind of covered that, didn't we? Yeah.
And it's a combination of these deep learning algorithms making content. So it's actually a result of generative AI technology.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about generative AI in episodes to come, and we'll clarify later in this episode kind of what we mean by that, and specifically regarding deepfakes. But just to kind of give another term which probably helps clarify how it's different to just any generative AI, that the US Congress referred to deepfakes as hyper-realistic digital forgeries. So I think we're going to try and just focus specifically on where we have AI that's trying to kind of copy things and produce unreal versions of real things, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly, because we hear so much about generative AI in general, creating art and things, but we want to talk about the specific problems where your, online identity can get stolen. And, previously, we could probably trust a lot of text, but, we now know, text is gotten taken away by GPT. And you'd think that you can trust voices and videos and photos and things, but as we'll discuss today, those are also in question. You can't trust these types of media and whether they relate to something the actual person said.
So I guess that age-old adage of seeing is believing is no longer true, or I guess we'll come to see whether it is or isn't. But
is that an Elvis reference?
Yeah. And just another thing to note as well, which hopefully we'll be able to convey this throughout the episode, but I guess one of the kind of concerning things about deepfakes and this whole topic, and maybe why I was slightly reluctant to cover it, is just that things are changing so quickly. It's kind of almost weekly, or definitely within the month, there's kind of new papers coming out and new technologies emerging, new examples of deepfakes. So it's such a kind of rapidly evolving area that it's quite hard to kind of pin it down and focus on it. But we're going to hopefully just cover the fundamentals, how the technology is working, do some demystifying, and then talk about some kind of big examples of deepfake use for bad and for good, and some recent stuff as well.
And I'll just give you guys some quick fire statistics just to show how sophisticated these technologies are. So one of the first websites that wanted to demonstrate the power of deepfakes is from Random Face Generator. And when they sampled just random people, 90% of them were deceived on the real versus deepfake images.
Wow.
And 50% of experienced photographers got it wrong. So it's clearly very good at deceiving humans. And it's not just photos, also for audio files. We got some research from UCL found that humans are only able to detect artificially generated speech 73% of the time. So still, it's easier to detect AI voices than photos, but still not that great.
But in both cases, more people are getting fooled than not, which is, I guess, quite concerning.
And speaking about getting fooled, some people like getting fooled because you have these virtual influencers now who are doing really well. For example, Ludo Magalu, I think I'm saying that wrong, very sorry about that, boasts over 14 million followers on Facebook, 6 million followers on Instagram, and 2.5 million YouTube subscribers.
Wow. And I imagine with that comes a lot of money and kind of subscriptions as well. So crazy to think that, someone that's not real is generating that much attention and revenue. Also, they can't be offended by you mispronouncing their name. So that's one
That's
good
a
thing.
really good point. Yeah, well, that just shows just how good and sophisticated this technology is.
So before we go on and to cover the applications, implications, some examples of deepfakes being used, we wanted to demystify the actual technology that's being used to generate these super realistic, convincing pieces of media. And the way we're going to do that is cover the two main approaches. So there are kind of two AI technologies that are most commonly used. And the reason we wanted to cover both of them is that each of them is kind of used for generating different media types currently. There's one that's more commonly used for creating videos, one that's a bit more commonly used for photos. And hopefully in doing that, it should actually help you to be able to spot when something has been deepfaked. So the first one that we're going to cover is a technology that has produced a lot of deepfake content of individuals where their faces have been swapped onto videos of other people. So you've probably seen lots of examples of the application of this technology, and it's called an encoder decoder. And the way that this works is that you run an AI that is trained by looking at thousands and thousands of images or frames of videos of people with their faces in the frame. And this AI learns to take that person's face, compress it as if you were just kind of compressing a file on your computer, and then reconstruct that face into the exact same frame. So basically the important part there is that it's learning to regenerate that person's face. And it learns to do this for the same person for thousands and thousands of frames. And then what happens is we take a new video of someone doing a completely different activity, different person, and we take that same AI that's been trained to reconstruct, let's say Donald Trump's face. We're probably going to be talking about him a lot in this episode, but it's been trained to reconstruct the features of Donald Trump's face. And then we take another video of someone running around naked that definitely isn't Donald Trump. And we have someone else's face in this video. And we take that AI that's been trained to reconstruct Donald Trump's face, give it this new video, and it will kind of swap out the face of this other person very convincingly. So I think the analogy there is that a human that's, let's say, very good at Photoshop and editing photos of people and their faces could theoretically do the same process of kind of taking Donald Trump's face and mapping it and kind of remorphing it onto someone else's body, but it would just take them a very long time. This encoder decoder AI learns to do that over time by looking at thousands of instances of faces and then can do it very, very quickly. And because it can do it super quickly, it can do that for all of the frames in a video and take a video of someone else and map Donald Trump's face onto it.
And you can kind of intuit why an AI would be good for this task, because just like a human, but if you were to do that task thousands of times, you'll probably realize some quick kind of patterns in how to do the edit in the most convincing way as quickly as possible.
Yeah. But then the second approach, so this is kind of an approach that's probably being more commonly used now. Originally, it was mainly used to just generate photos rather than videos, but we're now seeing it being used primarily for deepfakes. They are mostly a lot more convincing than the encoder-decoder approach. So do you want to quickly explain this other approach?
Yeah, this one's called a GAN, and it stands for Generative Adversarial Network. And it's a pretty cool idea. So you basically have two AIs in contest with each other, where one is the generator, so that's the generative part of GAN. And you can kind of imagine the generators like, the forger, and their task is to essentially look at a load of real faces and generate another real face. And then the adversarial, the discriminator, when you think of it as the detective, learns to, it sees the forged image and a real example, and it needs to learn which one was fake and which one was real.
So you can imagine, because also that, we're talking about just deep faking people's faces here, but let's say it was kind of doing artwork as well, and we gave the detective loads of examples of the Mona Lisa, like real photos of the painting, and then we want this generator, the forger, to try and start producing new instances of the Mona Lisa. To start with, it might just start drawing like a stick drawing or something, or like some really bad example that looks absolutely nothing like it, but iteratively over time it keeps going back and forth, doesn't it, between the forger and the detective, and then it will get closer and closer to the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, GANs are super interesting AI right now because they're really hard to train, and because of this exact dynamic of the forger gets better and then the detective gets better, and that's the ideal situation. But sometimes the forger gets way too good for the detective, and then the detective's so bad it can never learn from its mistakes, and then sometimes the detective's too good, and then the forger just kind of gives up. But when it goes right, they kind of both improve together, and then you end up with a really good forger because the detective got better.
Is also really good, yeah. So this technology has been around for a while. I think some of these neural networks were first designed in the kind of early 2010s, and since then we've seen deepfakes started to emerge, haven't we, Riku?
Yeah, so it all started in 2017 on the social media platform called Reddit, and where this user on there was just posting deepfakes, and just it was the first kind of demonstration of the technology, and it kind of it got a bit of attention, but deepfakes became a much bigger deal when people started making deepfakes of famous politicians saying things they didn't say. So there's a really funny, well, maybe funny video of Obama's deepfake saying rude things about Donald Trump. A really big one was Mark Zuckerberg has a deepfake done on him where he was saying how he's going to control the world with all the data he possesses. Things started getting a bit worrying in 2019 because technology such as Deep Nude came out, where anyone could download this application to their computer, and the Deep Nude was trained to remove clothes from women's photos and things. So,
and we'll come on to this later when we kind of cover some of the bad and the ugly, but yeah, this is a huge problem, one of the main kind of issues with deepfakes at the moment. But one of the ones I remember myself, I think this was probably the first instance when deepfakes were getting convincing enough that I kind of remember seeing something and shared it myself and was like fully tricked, which was, I don't know if some of you have seen it, it was a photo of the Pope Francis in wearing this big kind of designer puffer jacket. So if you Google Pope in a puffer jacket, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So I think another thing here, as well as the actual photo looking convincing, it's nothing like that's too outrageous that would have made me doubt it. It was just kind of funny, seeing the Pope wearing something like this. So I think that's another thing that's been developing along with the technology, are people's skills with using them and telling convincing stories along with these deepfakes.
So we already have really good deepfake technology pre-2020s, and now we're finally starting to get social media and government starting to actually take action and make some systems to detect deepfakes and how to regulate these issues.
But before we get onto that, I think just to convey some of the bad and the ugly sides to deepfakes, and maybe tell some stories about how they're being used and misleading people around the world, we just wanted to cover some examples of both sides of the spectrums, and then we could start to cover how governments and corporations are starting to try and tackle them. And there's a whole range of different ways that people are getting creative with using this technology, from scamming people to propaganda, trying to influence politics. So just to kind of list some pretty high profile examples and some cases when things have gone really badly wrong. So in 2019, I think this was one of the first examples of a big scam that was kind of pulled off using deepfake technology. And the chief of a UK subsidiary of a German energy firm was tricked into paying nearly €250,000 into a Hungarian bank account after being phoned by a fraudster who was mimicking the German CEO's voice. So basically his boss, they used a deep fake of his voice and called this guy in the UK and managed to get him to transfer this huge sum of money into a bank account of these scammers. And that was the first big example of that. However, in 2020, something went even more wrong, which was where, very similar scenario again, but it was a manager of a Japanese company based in Hong Kong, again, received a phone call. It was a voice that this person recognized, It was the director of the parent business, and basically he told this elaborate story using a deepfake of the person's voice. The company had basically made an acquisition, and they therefore needed to authorize a transfer of $35 million. Wow. Which completed. I think the authorities went on to kind of capture some of these people and get some of the money back. But yeah, that was a very big scam that obviously was facilitated entirely by deepfake technology. And then, some political things as well. So very, very recently, there was some deepfake images of Donald Trump being arrested. And it kind of depicted these scenes of him being chased by the police, fought to the ground, kind of yelling, resisting arrest, that looked very convincing, looked like Donald Trump, looked like a real scene. And these were shared around by news platforms, people on social media. I think most of the mainstream platforms were mentioning that it was deepfaked AI. However, there were other platforms that shared this, and it was a much more subtle reference to it being a deepfake. So I think lots of people might have seen these images at the time and thought that Donald Trump had been arrested. And this, we're going to touch on this later, but this starts to raise this big kind of concern and issue with being able to generate images in this way and create visual evidence of scenes that haven't actually happened, which is the kind of boy who cried wolf scenario. So, now millions of people have seen these images of Donald Trump being arrested. So if that were ever to actually happen and those real scenes were to occur and people got photos, there would be kind of huge distrust there. And might be a big letdown to some people that had already seen those images and wouldn't be as kind of shocked when they scroll past it, or may just scroll past it thinking it's a deep fake again. So this kind of blurring of the line between reality, fact and fiction is one of the huge, very imminent concerns with generative AI that we'll touch on later.
Yeah, there's no doubt about the kind of manipulative and the potential misinformation of this technology, but they're just leveraging the absolute dominance of social media these days.
I know, it's a very concerning state. And just one last doom and gloomy one before we get onto the good. In 2020, there was a child custody case in the UK where one of the parents submitted quote-unquote evidence of a phone call recording of the other parent speaking abusively about the child. And it was only later on in the trial, after things had progressed, that there was some forensic evidence that showed that this was actually a deep fake. And that phone call never actually happened. So, this is another really concerning aspect of this, that governments and lawmaking is just not equipped yet for this type of attack that can happen from generative AI.
Wow, so it's really just completely eroding trust on on a digital platform, really. The kind of most intuitive ways to identify people online, how they look, how they sound, are just completely in question now.
It's back to what we said at the start, seeing is no longer believing.
Okay, so moving on, we can talk about there are some really good stuff that comes out of this technology as well. So one that really stuck out to me was for people with neurological disorders such as ALS, who can end up losing their voice. Patients can now recover their voice using deepfake technology by feeding these AIs old audio clips of the patient in question, and the AI can learn to understand how to generate their voice for new text.
Yeah, I saw this one company that, for people with kind of neurodegenerative disorders, when they know they're declining, sadly to the point where they will eventually lose their voice, can have people come into their homes or care settings where they record them saying lots of different phrases and words, and it can just generate a complete digital version of their voice that they then use. So almost like Stephen Hawking's, but in his own voice rather than a computerized voice.
Wow, yeah. And another really fascinating application of these deepfakes was for super famous people like David Beckham. They used deepfakes to increase awareness for malaria. So they had kind of an advert of him speaking in English, raising awareness for malaria, but then they could use deepfake technology to have him talk in, I think it was 27 different languages,
wow,
all in the voice of David Beckham talking about deepfakes.
So rather than just reading subtitles, they see a much more convincing, engaging version of him speaking their language.
Exactly, yeah. There was another cool one about challenging gender bias in football. So people typically have a more negative sentiment towards female football than male football. And to challenge this, what they did was they had a load of clips of footage from female football games, and they used deepfakes technology to map male faces onto the females' bodies, and basically just like replace the female bodies with male bodies. And people enjoyed the game more, and then afterwards they were told, oh, by the way, you just watched football, women's football.
So hopefully breaking down that kind of stereotype and stigma.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll go, oh wow, I just was completely prejudiced because they're women.
And one final example that I'd seen, to sort of go back to your example of David Beckham and swapping his voice out, was within the entertainment industry. So, imagine all of this content that's being produced and made in English, in kind of Western countries, and rather than everyone else in the rest of the world, if they want to consume that media, having to read subtitles the whole time or listen to some really bad dubbing, they can watch all of that content, but you've used kind of deep fakes to translate all of the actors' voices in very naturally into the languages that all those other people speak. So just have this much more enjoyable, engaging, entertaining content that's accessible to so many more people now.
However, there's kind of an ugly truth to the situation. Although we've just kind of listed some good and bad, there's kind of like an overwhelming majority of how this technology is being used.
So there was an organization that did this kind of very large study in America. They performed the same study back in 2019, and there's been a recent one that's come out this year in 2023, where they basically analysed 85 dedicated channels for deepfake content across over 100 different websites. And one thing to note initially was the prevalence of deepfakes, which I think I mentioned this at the start of this episode, that maybe coverage of this stuff has kind of dialed down and people think it's maybe plateauing as an issue. But this study basically found that since 2019, there's been a 550% increase in deepfake content, which was nearly 100,000 deepfake videos that were found online across these 100 plus websites.
Yes, and very concerningly, 98% of all deepfake videos online are related to pornography.
Wow. That is a very large, nearly all of it, basically.
Yeah.
And 99% of those pornographic videos were sadly targeting women entirely. And of those women which are being targeted in these videos, we see a trend in this study that the majority of them are famous people from the entertainment industry, so singers, actors, and therefore, this kind of content is being created of them definitely without consent.
And now that AI is so much more accessible and things are cheaper and quicker, it takes less than 25 minutes and costs not even $1 to make a 60-second deepfake pornographic video of anyone just with one image of their face.
Wow.
So I guess that's kind of the ugly truth, that looks more about the balance between these good and bad uses of this technology, and sadly it's overwhelmingly on the bad side of things.
It is, sadly, yeah. But now, to cut through a bit of the doom and gloom, we're going to do our fun fact segment and then hopefully come back and inspire us a bit more with ways that people are looking to try and tackle these and fight this growing amount of deepfake content. So, fun fact time.
Yeah, welcome back. I have a slightly longer fun fact than normal, but not a lot longer. Maybe some of you have heard of this already. This guy called Jack Wilmot spent a week in the future. So he strapped this kind of VR headset to his face for a whole week and kind of showered, ate and slept, essentially, minimally with it on as much as possible.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I don't know if that sounds appealing or not. He was kind of battling dragons and boxing with Rocky and stuff. He could still answer his emails and things in the virtual world, so all that software was there. But he found that kind of the lack of natural day and night and stuff like that was like the most difficult thing.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
He felt super productive by the end of it, but he said at the end of it he never appreciated the smell of fresh air.
Oh wow, yeah, I definitely would not want to try that. Cool, so my fact is a little bit on the gross side maybe. So this is about an AI-powered robot vacuum cleaner, so the Roomba, which you may have heard of. There was these homeowners who had just bought a Roomba, and they had also just got a new puppy, and very sadly, after they'd gone to bed, the puppy, as they tend to do, took a poo on the floor, and the Roomba, being the kind of AI that it was with one specific goal to just clean the house, wasn't equipped to do anything with that dog poo, and it basically, these homeowners woke up the next morning and found their whole house basically was completely smeared in this dog poo. So I think this is a good example of when AI just has like one specific task and it can't reason outside that task. So yeah, that was my fun, slightly gross fact.
Do you think dog poo was in the training data set?
I do not. Well, evidently not. So cool. Back to the episode.
Hello, welcome back. So we're just going to move on to talk about how to detect deep fakes. And as we mentioned before in the kind of timeline of things, deepfake technology, generating deepfakes got very convincing by 2019. And from 2020 we started to see like governments and products used to actually detect these very harmful objects. So yeah, there's been a lot of work recently on detecting deepfakes, and they kind of related to what we spoke about before with the GAN. So when you make it, the algorithm to make a deepfake uses this forger and the detective. Well, as we can imagine, if the detective's good, then you get good forger. But the good news is, if the detective's good, you can use it to detect a deepfake. So a lot of methods now basically use these GANs to make deepfake data, and then because you've made the data yourself, you know which one's real and which one's not real, and then you use that data set to train another AI to differentiate between them.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been used in academia, and we've seen some stuff in industry as well.
Yeah, some companies as well that are coming out with tools now. I think Intel recently introduced it was a real-time deepfake detector that they claim to have 90% accuracy, 96% accuracy for detecting deepfake videos. But there've been other reports that show, on real-world applications, it's not as good as that. But there's a really interesting application that's slightly different from the using the sort of detective approach, which is looking for like specific telltale signs for people being deepfaked in particular. So this Intel one actually tries to detect from the pixels like blood flow in people. So I think it's looking at kind of like color changes and stuff within the video pixels, to try and detect whether that matches the face and stuff. So it's crazy work being done. But I don't think there's any kind of go-to method at the moment just to apply to any video or photo that can detect them, but there's lots of work and progress being done, isn't there? There's this other thing with kind of watermarking, right?
Yeah, there's this other cool idea that they kind of called it radioactive data, but it's a bit like when you see an image on Google Images and then bottom left or right corner will be like, a watermark. So, when you copy and paste and put it into your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I hate that.
you always have to crop around it. But imagine that, but they obviously don't want to obscure the image and reduce the quality of the image. So they developed this technique so that you can watermark an image, but human eyes can't detect it because it's this like super subtle random kind of filter on top of the image that we can't tell. But to an AI, it's really obvious that there is a watermark. So when a deepfake is done using that image, you can really easily detect it by tracing this filter.
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of the fact that we're so used to seeing like really high resolution images now and kind of computer screens that are of much higher resolution to what like the human eye can see. So, we're able to, within the very large number of pixels and kind of binary data that encodes an image, to kind of hide this noise that the computer can see, but then to our, like, the resolution of our eye, it, appears the same.
Yeah, but speaking of human eyes, how can you detect deepfakes?
That is a good question. Yeah, we put some points on here. So currently, and again, with how quickly everything's changing, these might not be relevant for long, but for now, we've got some points for some like telltale signs in sort of deepfake images and videos. And I think some of these are relevant to the GAN approach, and some of them are relevant to with the face swapping, which is why we kind of covered that early on.
Yeah, so kicking it off, I'm not sure if any of you have done this, but I remember playing around with Photoshop as a kid and like trying really hard to edit a photo where it wasn't obvious that the background was like kind of shifting. Well, you can imagine the exact same thing kind of happens when an AI does this, super fast automatic Photoshop. So if things seem blurry or obscure, I kind of look for, problems with texture in the skin and hair, particularly like on the edges of things. a lot of the time, if the deepfake isn't a perfect one, that's where you find it.
And yeah, I think on that same point, when we have these face swapping algorithms, you can often see some signs of the lighting in the reflection of people's eyes being like very different. So, it might not match the kind of environment that the rest of their body's in. One of the funny ones which started to see crop up specifically with generating images from scratch with these GAN networks, rather than the kind of swapping of actual videos, is that for some reason these generative AI tools do a really bad job currently at generating people's hands. So yeah, one telltale sign is if you see people like missing a finger, or they've got an extra finger, or they've got one giant finger and a few smaller ones. So yeah, that's one. Again, I don't think there's much of a consensus as to why this happens. Maybe it's just the intricacies of the human hand, but yeah, hands is one to try and spot.
Well, the weird thing about the hands is that it draws really accurate like kind of shapes of fingers, and like it's clearly learnt really well the features of a hand, but it doesn't seem to have learnt the logic that humans have 5 of these fingers.
Yeah, it's just not very good at counting off however many fingers that we have,
and it was never trained to count how many
exactly.
fingers we have,
Yeah. And lastly, just sort of an obvious one is just to triple check the source, basically. So where has that image or video come from? One cool thing that you can do, which I think journalists use a fair amount, is basically reverse image searching using Google. So you can actually do a Google image search, but instead of searching for something using text, you can give it an image file. So if you had an image that you're unsure whether it was a deepfake or not, you can actually upload that image to Google image search and hopefully find the source where it came from. Maybe if there were some articles saying that was a deepfake or something. So that's a tool that I think is probably being used more than it has previously. So I think the approach currently for tackling deepfakes is kind of 2 prongs. So obviously we've got the technological side that we just spoke about. So, researchers trying to develop tools to detect the deepfakes. But then there's also the legislative side. So lots of governments now are very conscious of the kind of problem of deepfakes and are trying to catch up and put in laws in place to help mitigate them.
Yeah, and one of the ways they're doing that is kind of putting some pressure on the people actually posting content. And the first government to start regulating this was actually China. And they kind of they do require all deepfake content to be clearly labeled. So basically a little flag, self-flag, say, by the way, this image I'm using is a deepfake.
Yeah, and it's a crime then to share that stuff without kind of stating it. I think the only thing with that, obviously, is, China being a sort of surveillance state is probably much easier to kind of control that, which is maybe why that approach hasn't been as swiftly implemented in other countries.
Yeah, exactly. So the EU are trying to do the same, but it seems like they're having this difficulty where maybe it's not as easy to monitor the content.
Yeah, there are basically lots of kind of individual rights that have to be maintained and therefore kind of exclude people from having to state when they've generated it by deepfakes and kind of just encourage it.
But in the UK, we've got some positive legislation getting put in place. So there's a new recent safety bill that will criminalise the sharing of deepfakes of intimate images. But we've also got in Virginia, there's now a law just saying it's outright crime in the same way, just sharing deepfakes.
Yeah, so trying to tackle it from both kind of generating these pieces of content and then also sharing it as well now is becoming a crime. And then obviously, as much as kind of governments can put these laws in place, all of this stuff is primarily being shared on social media platforms as well. So some of the big media companies are also trying to reduce and discourage this. So I think YouTube is now actively trying to moderate any generated content that could cause misharm or mislead people. I think you mentioned, is Meta doing the same?
Yeah, so Meta, following it with Instagram and like Reddit, all have community guidelines where you can't post deepfakes without explicitly saying.
Right. And just to lastly touch on, again, a very recent example of an industry now that is kind of very conscious of the encroaching of AI and how quickly it could potentially take jobs if people aren't careful, is in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry again. So it was the longest strike in Hollywood's history, which lasted 118 days and ended just in November. Which basically the sticking point of this strike, there was a load of different topics covered, but it was mainly about the encroachment of AI from all different angles within the industry. So generative AI being used to write scripts. There was concern of technical jobs as well, like kind of color grading of videos that could potentially be taken. But there was a very pressing issue of deepfakes of actors that was, again, a big sticking point. And basically, one of the main disputes that we saw was between the Screen Actors Guild, along with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, whereby the producers essentially wanted to pay some of the kind of top actors a one-off fee to create digital scans of their faces and their bodies that they could then reuse within content over and over again, without paying them for the kind of preceding uses, and also use it after they died. So unsurprisingly, this was of concern to actors, and there was a big kind of dispute over this. And I think in the end, the settlement was that actors would be compensated for the reuse of the scans. But, it's very interesting with Hollywood that this is an industry now that is kind of very conscious and aware that AI is around the corner for them. And specifically deepfakes as well being used to replace actors in content creation, and how people could be out of jobs, and we have more and more automation in all different aspects of this industry.
Wow, so you're saying there could be one more Daniel Craig James Bond?
True, I hope so. So obviously that's an example in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry, but I think we just wanted to end with looking forward slightly and seeing where the state of the art of this technology is progressing, because a lot more sectors and industries will be affected, and I think the prevalence of deepfakes will just be increasing for years to come, and stuff is going to change quite significantly in the next few years.
Yeah, because the methods we were talking about earlier that drive the production of these deepfakes, you'll find with the current state of the art, if it's long form video, you still require an original video to map the kind of target's face onto. Whereas the current state of the art of producing an entirely new video from just like a text prompt, generate this scene. Right now, those purely synthetic videos only last up to about 4 seconds.
So like we were saying earlier, I think the GAN network, which we mentioned, is mainly for generating new images, right? And then if, like you say, for longer form videos of famous people speaking, it's just this face swapping approach currently. But, in a few years' time, this is bound to change, and there are already companies that are releasing tools where you can, like you said, put in a text prompt of Donald Trump riding a unicorn, and it can currently create a very short video of that. But, you can imagine in not a very long amount of time, this will develop to being able to create as long a video as you want from a text prompt of anything that has never been filmed before.
Yeah, and I came across some software that kind of was the midpoint of that, where you can write in a text prompt like, write me a video selling Amsterdam, why should I go to Amsterdam, and it generates a script and managed to pull together videos from its training data and edits it in a way that makes a long form video that's entirely generated by AI.
Yeah, and I think with the advancement of these technologies and the fact that that's going to become increasingly easy to do that, to just sit kind of by your computer and generate as a scene or a short film about anything that you could imagine, you could guess that there's a kind of decline in wanting to go out and film, or the long kind of arduous process of getting that footage manually. And that's kind of been reflected by some statistics that have been released. So Europol, the agency, basically released a report where they estimated that by 2026, as much as 90% of new online content will be synthetically generated. So I think that ties into that notion that it's just so much easier when these tools get better to just generate the images rather than kind of manually curate them, which is a scary statistic. So I think, with these detection tools coming out, and then, I think we touched on some individual responsibilities to help try and protect people as well, right?
Yeah, because I guess the reality is that this technology is getting so much better, and there's not a lot we can do to stop the technology getting better, but we can of course increase our own awareness, educate ourselves about this technology, and tell our friends, our family, these tricks we were talking about earlier, how to detect it.
And I think just an awareness as well, right? So I put on there like a critical consumption of media. So rather than taking things you see now as kind of the ground truth or just fundamental fact, be slightly critical. Look where that piece of media has come from, what's the source. So without going, overly critical and having like general distrust in online content, it's obviously about striking this balance, which is tricky. I think it will take us time to find that, but really kind of fact checking things, especially before you go on to share those to kind of friends and family as well.
Yeah, and especially kind of keeping an open mind about things, like not necessarily being suspicious of everything, but there's been a lot of studies on echo chambers and things, and there's a real hotspot for these kind of deepfake, fake news kind of things, where the fake news that are directed to your favorite content is the most likely to convince you.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like we were speaking about earlier, that's a very important time in governments and setting legislation as well and policy. So, if you can look into that in your local government, what's going on, how are they looking to tackle the rise of deepfakes, see if you can get involved and support policies that help mitigate that.
Yeah. So hopefully that demystifies kind of what deepfakes are, how they're made, where things are going,
how they're being used. Yeah. Hopefully we covered a very big topic there in a short amount of time, but we could definitely come back to this, see how things are changing in the future. But to tease our next episode before we leave,
it's going to be the 1-to-1 AI versus human.
Yeah, just so covering specifically, I think we wanted to focus on some of the areas that AI is still worse than humans, and some of the things that it's bad at. So hopefully a bit refreshing where it falls short.
Yeah, we're thinking that there's a lot of fear-mongering about AI, and there's actually some really fundamental things that us humans are so much better than AI at, and we want to cover those.
So yeah, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.